Well, we want to welcome all of you to the Missoula Organization of Realtors Candidate Interview Forum. And we're really pleased that you all took time out of your busy schedules to join us today, and we want to thank you for that. I'll be asking each of you 3 questions to help keep the answers fresh and interesting. We'll alternate tables with all 3 questions. So, for example, table 1 will answer 1 question, and then table 2 will answer, and then we'll go back and then rotate back through that way. The only thing I would caution you on, what we do is we read a large question at first, and then on subsequent questions they're condensed. So you really have to apologize for this, but it's a good idea to listen carefully to the long version, because the short version kind of can confuse you a little bit. Okay, the timekeeper will show a yellow card when your time is almost up, and we allow 1.5 minutes on our each question per candidate. On top of that, we'll have 1.5 minutes of introduction of each candidate. Okay, and of course, when the card turns red, you're in trouble. It's time to move on to the next question. We'll start out with a brief introduction from each of our candidates, and we'll start with table 1. This will be table 1, table 2, and we're going to group this table into table 3. You'll have an opportunity there. That way it'll work well for us. So we'll start here with Betsy Hands. Betsy, would you please give us an introduction?
Sure. My name is Betsy Hands. I served my first session in 2007, and I sat on the Natural Resources Committee as well as the Local Government Committee. I currently sit on the interim committee for the audit, the legislative audit. I am the current executive director for Homeward, which is an organization that provides first-time homebuyer education, financial education, as well as we develop affordable housing, multifamily rental housing. Some of my key interests are in climate change, as well as affordable housing and in renewable energy, and trying to create new jobs in the energy sector. So I have a passion for bicycling and skiing. I have a background, a master's in environmental studies, but I really see the importance of creating living wage jobs for our folks that live here in Missoula, as I work so closely with people that live in our housing and take our classes at Homeward. So that's a little introduction to who I am.
Thank you, Betsy. Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Reinhardt. I represent House District 97, which you're currently in. It starts by the university and runs out to Orchard Homes and Target Range. Like Betsy, I'm serving my first term and running for re-election. I served on the Business and Labor Committees and Health and Human Services during the first session in 2007. I'm on the Economic Affairs Interim Committee. We've been looking at economic development happening at our universities. We've been looking at value-added agriculture and working to protect our agricultural lands. And I'm very excited about those pieces. I grew up in Livingston, Montana, went to college in Helena, and that's how I got involved with the legislature. I did an internship. And then I worked with citizens on oil and gas and hard rock mining issues for Northern Plains. I currently work as a land use planner at the Office of Planning and Grants. It's a very tough job at times, as many of you know, and I work with some of you in that capacity, but I'm very open to working with you and hearing your ideas and working to find common ground. I bought my first house last October. I took the first-time home buyer class, and so I definitely have an interest in helping other folks be first-time home buyers and get into their first homes and to have that good quality of life and what we love about living here. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Michelle. Sue?
My name is Sue Malik, and this is my first time running for the legislature. My only other political experience was as chair of the Missoula City Government Study Commission, 2004 commission. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology and a master's in communication studies. I'm from Montana and have lived here all my life, and my husband and I raised our son here. I've been interested in politics forever. Basically, I worked on the Eisenhower campaign, I think, when I was 3 or something. This is an ongoing thing. And so When my son graduated from college this year, I thought this is the time I want to fulfill this goal of serving in the legislature. My big issues, I work at the University of Montana. I've been there for 19 years, and I provide academic advising to business students. So a big thing for me is small business development, and also housing is a big issue, healthcare, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Sue. Will?
My name's Will Deshaw. I've lived all my life in Missoula. I'm a product of parochial and public schools here in Missoula and graduated from the U of M. I'm on the school board currently at Hellgate Elementary. I'm the only candidate that lives in House District 98 that is vying for that seat. I think it's important that somebody that lives there ought to represent that district, and that they understand the ramifications that legislatures and local government agencies can put upon them. And so that's why I'm running and who I am. I've been here before, and I hope to represent my district in the next legislative session.
Thank you, Will. Stephen?
I've got to stand up because I'm more used to talking to people. Besides, I know some of you, and this way you can all see what I look like, and you can wonder why would a guy that looks like this with a name like Eschenbacher run? Well, I can't do anything about the looks. The name's already been pre-printed on the ballot, so we'll make it a little bit easier that way. Right now, I'm serving as a public defender in Hamilton. I live in House District 96. In fact, I'm the only one, although if I get elected, I hopefully will also represent Ms. Sands, who also lives in House District 96, and Mr. Nooney. But basically, I've never ran actively for a public office before. I did 2 years ago run as in the primary, basically on the campaign platform, that I wouldn't bother you and I wouldn't ask for any money, and I still got a third of the vote, which I thought was kind of interesting. But Libertarian Republican. I believe in maximizing individual freedoms, and that the basic purpose of government is going to be to remove the restrictions that for the creation of wealth. The people who have the initiative, the entrepreneurs, those are the ones who are going to be out there creating the wealth that builds a better, stronger economy for us, which helps everyone that's involved. My biggest issues are going to be particularly how the law impacts on the poor people. It's also how the law is used in every other aspect. When we start passing laws, we put restrictions on our property, our freedoms, and our money. That's what I'm most concerned about. So it's basically a philosophy issue.
Thank you, Stephen. Teresa?
I'm not going to stand because I'm really comfortable sitting here. My name is Teresa Henry. I am running for re-election to my third term for House District 96. In the first session in 2005, I served on state administration, health and human services, and local government. State administration covers, addresses bills related to the retirement plans, the veterans affairs, and voter issues, voter education, and the various ethics issues. Health and human services is my passion. I'll talk about that in a minute. Local government, many of you have been involved in that committee. That's the one where I certainly learned the most about planning issues. The second session that I served, I returned to help to state administration, and that's one of the areas of interest of mine, both the voter education and the retirement. It's hard to understand those complex monetary issues, so for me it was very helpful to be a second term on there. I also served on agriculture. I'm not sure who I made happy or sad that I got that assignment, but I didn't serve on human services. I'll briefly tell you about the description of the district. Starts at 6th and Cottonwood in the slant streets, goes all the way across to Reserve, down Reserve, out to Blue Mountain, across to Linda Vista, up Lower Miller Creek, behind Walmart, and back up.
Thank you, Teresa. Diane?
Thank you. I'm Diane Sands. I'm running for my third term for re-election in House District 95, which is Wapakia, all the slant streets between Brooks and Stevens, picks up, goes up 24th, partway up the hill, and also includes the Missoula Manor as one whole precinct. So I'm happy to be representing that district. I spent over a dozen years living in that district. I'm a couple blocks out of it right now. I have spent about 30 years around the legislature, both as a lobbyist for a long time. I've also served as staff in the legislature, so I really know how that system works from pretty much every angle and how to get things done. Good working relationships on a bipartisan basis with both the House and Senate. And it's one of the reasons I'm really glad during the interim to be serving on the Children, Families, Health and Human Services Interim Committee, because that is a really very nonpartisan House and Senate collaboration to work on serious issues, in this case particularly related to healthcare. Teresa Henry and I both serve on that committee, and this time we're looking at a lot of issues around access for healthcare. Other issues for me, I currently work at Fort Missoula at the Historical Museum. I know a lot about historic preservation. I'm buying a building that is a National Historic Treasure at the moment. I live in and am a homeowner up in Linda Vista, so I'm very concerned about what's happening. I have a lot of neighbors trying to sell houses and buy houses and having a heck of a time. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you all. First question will be for Table 1. Due to the nature of industry in Montana, there are limited statistics portraying how substantial the impact of housing functions are on the local economy. When taken into account development, land sales, wholesale goods, etc., the housing market becomes one of the largest industries in our state. Data from the O'Connor Center of Rocky Mountain West indicates that construction and real estate alone contribute to $324 million in salaries to the Missoula County economy in 2006. Yet when considering new revenue streams, the development growth community is often focused for taxation. How do you see the role of housing function as it pertains to Montana's economy in the future? And what policies would you support or propose to support that? So we start with Betsy.
That's a big question to nab off on the first question, but I agree. I actually see the construction industry as a major component to our economy, and it's one of the reasons why when I talk about affordable housing development, I try to get people to recognize that if you invest in affordable housing, you're investing in good jobs and in all of the industries that we shop from in terms of materials and resources. So I absolutely agree, and for me, one of the ways that I look at it is how do we invest in creating affordable housing in our community, because there's such a strong tie to the health of our economy by having housing where people can work. And so when I look at the people that we serve in our classes and in our housing that we provide, I actually see a direct link to the health of Missoula is in really trying to promote a way to continue to provide mechanisms for the construction of affordable housing. So in that respect, last session I had a bill that was looking at how to use the extra generated revenues that our budget had to put into a housing trust fund, a statewide housing trust fund. And it didn't pass that last session, but there is momentum this time around. People are seeing housing as an issue all across the state. And I believe that we do need to invest in a housing trust fund like many other states around the country have done. So that's one place that I'm really passionate about and will follow through with in the next session.
Thank you, Betsy. Michelle.
Where do you start? There's so much to cover. One of the things that I'd be interested in working with all of you is to work to find common ground to revise our laws so that they create incentives for good design. Right now, I think the process that we have that is heavily micromanaged by state law is very process heavy. Do your element review in 5 days, do your sufficiency review in 15 days, do your minor subdivision review in 35 days. And I don't think that it has set up good incentives for good design necessarily. And I would like your ideas to how we can keep what we love about living here. We all love our community very much. We have great open spaces and working farms and ranches and good water quality, and we are headed in a positive direction of having a walkable, bikeable community. A third of our folks cannot drive. They're too young, too old, or disabled, or they don't want to drive. And so we need to work on our infrastructure development and having those public-private partnerships. There are dollars from the state and from federal transportation that we can work collaboratively, but it will take having stakeholders like yourselves as well as other opinions to work that out. And because state law determines how the process happens, I think that's something that we need to work on together and to bridge that gap. So I don't have all of the answers, but I can tell you how frustrating it can be from a regulatory perspective. And so let's continue the conversation and work it out.
Thank you, Michelle. Next question is for Table 2. Numerous local communities have imposed or are considering imposing various types of impact fees on new residential and commercial growth. In almost every case, these fees are not in compliance with statutory requirements, for in the Impact Fee Enabling Act of 2005. These requirements put into place to, 1, ensure that local governments are compliant with strict federal requirements for the imposition of impact fees, and 2, ensure that the development is paying for no more or less than its actual impact on the cost of local services. Various groups will attempt to make it easier for local governments to impose impact fees on new growth that will make it even harder for Montana's workforce to become homeowners. What do you consider to be the pros and cons of impact fees, and how would you feel about making them easier for local governments to impose? Sue?
Oh, I would give this question first, right? I think the pros of impact fees are that people know the costs of their property when they buy. That is, rather than have SIDs put on later for sidewalks or bike paths or street lights or whatever the size of your subdivision creates in the neighborhood. That infrastructure is taken care of first. And I have to say that we see across the country that those kinds of developments are valued, that the prices of those homes continue to go up over time because people do want to get outside and meet their neighbors and walk and bike and have opportunities to catch a bus and be able to get out on arterial roads without long waits at stop signs. So I think the cost is important. I think the amenities are important to the value of the property over time. And the cons would be that the property would be more expensive to begin with, certainly.
Thank you, Sue. Will?
Well, I don't know how many of you read the Missoula, and I hope you all do. I had a letter to the editor this morning in there that dealt mainly with impact fees. I do not believe either of our government agencies know what the true impact is on communities due to development. We had a gentleman from Eugene, Oregon come over and tell us a few weeks ago that the true impact was $25,000 per house that was built. I don't know where those figures came from, and you can't find them in any of his literature. But until government agencies can show me what the true cost of impact is by building a house, I'm against impact fees. Now, there may be cases where impact fees are truly needed. For instance, the development west of Reserve now has impact fees put on a lot for the increase or the betterment of the Mullen Reserve Street corridor. At $1,500 a lot is what I think was the last figure they were using. That isn't going to fix that intersection very soon. That may be a case where impact fees may be reasonable, but not one government agency can tell me or you what the true impact is. For instance, when it comes to raising taxes, they accuse developers of not paying their fair share. When it comes to wanting to implement impact fees, they say use the same identical argument, and my time is up. I will revisit this.
Thank you, Will. Okay, Table 3, your question is, with increasing growth rates in various communities in Montana, water quality and quantity issues are becoming a major focus of policymakers. Even though research shows that residential development has minimal impact on water resources, the process required to obtain a water right permit for new homeowners and businesses are becoming very difficult and costly recently. How would you recommend managing Montana's water resource so that our growing communities have access to clean drinking water? Steve?
Well, I really want to answer those other two questions first, but this is just kind of throws into the whole package. One of the problems we have in Missoula is affordable housing. The reason we have so little affordable housing is we're not building houses. we add on prices or costs when impact fees and other things like that, which keep raising the prices up. These are prepaid taxes. Another problem we have is when we have housing developments that are stopped because of a potential possible problem to water. Now, no one's opposed to clean water. Everyone wants to have clean water, but I also want to have more affordable housing available. My fear is Missoula could quickly turn into the equivalent of Boulder, Colorado, where the people who work here can't afford to live here because we restrict the number of houses that are available. Unless there's some showing based on some soil problems or some other aspect where it could be influencing the aquifer adversely, no. There should be a presumption given that any housing development that goes in is going to be fine for the water. Let them, instead of saying, no, we don't know for sure, say, yes, we do know for sure, and then we can address the issue, whether through sewer or whatever other processes are available. But we have to be able to build homes for the people that live here so that we have more affordable housing so more people can afford to live here like they want to.
Thank you, Steve. Teresa?
Until I teach nursing, and one of my first questions is always, let me look at that data. Because I have a few questions about the documentation of that statement that a housing development has minimal impact on water resources. I would question that. My background is in public health and occupational and environmental health nursing, and it doesn't make sense to me that if you put a settlement of people on any given spot of land, that you need to plan, just like when you camp, you need to plan where you poop and where you drink. Those are just part of the deal. So it would seem to me that we should be able to assess those or determine those kinds of real impacts. And my recommendation would be that we would start looking at making decisions based on evidence, where we say, we know that if this many people live on this square of land, this is the effect of this. And there is public health information that talks about that, as well as looking at, from our point of view, what are the unintended consequences? If we past this particular rule, what then is the negative effect to that? Because I think the struggle and the tension between all of this is, yes, I want to live in Missoula, yes, I want to do that, and yes, I just as soon not have E. coli in my drinking water, even if it is if it's acceptable levels. I'd rather have none.
Diane, we'd ask you to answer the same question.
Thanks. Well, I always love the old Western saying that alcohol's for drinking and water's for fighting, and that appears to continue to be the case, does it not? When you first raised the issue of water rights, I thought you were, being an eastern Montana person and having a ranch out there, I thought you were talking about real water rights, but now I realize you're talking about it relative to housing issues, which is somewhat of a different issue. My concern there is largely also a public health interest. And I think the other issue is really the issue of balancing private water rights. I know a number of people who built houses down in, say, the Bitterroot, who are now finding that their neighbors are drawing down the water table. So there are no end of conflicting water rights issues, even among the private parties involved in development out there. And I think those have to be dealt with. And that's where public agencies come in, because we're the ones who end up often playing the arbiter between those and trying to find a way to balance those so that they're fair to everyone that's around. The other thing I think is important is around the healthcare issues. We have issues such as, I'm really proud that we've taken out the Milltown Dam and are fixing the water for the Milltown area. Having arsenic in your water system is not good. Those of us who know about the history of Butte and Anaconda know that having contaminated water in your system is an issue that affects everyone. People don't want to buy property or build a house if they have contaminated water sources. So I think these are issues of public concern and private interest as well, and those have to be balanced.
Thank you. Table 1, your new question is, what do you consider to be the pros and cons of impact fees? And how would you feel about making them easier for local governments to impose? Betsy?
Well, I agree that impact fees do raise the cost of producing housing. We, as affordable housing developers, know what those costs are as they line up on a budget at Homeward. And one of the things that I do, sitting on the mayor's housing team that evaluates all of the different policies that impact housing development, is looking at how do you define affordable housing. Because it's one of those terms that gets used a lot, because we're concerned about how do the people that work here live here. So So the first thing that I would propose, and what the mayor is actually doing, is defining what is affordable housing and who are we serving. And once you get that definition put out there and people recognize and understand it, you can actually create a way to reduce the impact fees for the housing that you're targeting. So I think it's really important to recognize that if you're creating homeownership opportunities for moderate income families, the middle income families that earn $40,000 or $50,000, and you know what that mortgage has to be that they can cover, that then you create a mechanism for that developer to actually get a reduction in their impact fees. So that would be the way that I would address it, because there are costs to creating spread out infrastructure. And we do need to, as a city, be able to account for those costs. And so if you're going to promote affordable housing and workforce housing, you need to know how to interact with the developers. I also think that you can create smart land use policies that really try to actually encourage getting onto the city infrastructure, and what are the best ways to do that.
Michelle?
Oh, there's so many things to cover in such a short time. But again, let's continue this conversation. If any of you are participating in the UFDA process, the Urban Fringe Development, or the Downtown Association Plan, or some of these different zoning code updates, there's definitely a desire, it appears, from our community to invest in our core. And if we can do that, I think we can be very smart about stretching our resources, which are thin when it comes to local government. Revenues and taxation have not kept up with maintaining our infrastructure, and that includes water lines and sewer lines and roads and sidewalks. And if we keep shifting those costs down the road, we pay more. When you tack on an RSID, as Sue mentioned, later you add 15 to 30% in administrative costs, and the cost of asphalt and concrete keep going up. So we need to think about where is it best to make this investment, and let's do it by working together and sharing public and private resources. Because you need this infrastructure to do new developments, and yet we all pay for it in our property taxes. So let's think about where we can get some of that money. Some of that, you're right, it's coming from impact fees, but again, it has to be tied to the proportional impact of the development. Right now, there are a lot of hoops you got to jump through to do impact fees for local governments. But I think we should put it all on the table and look at how we can make the best investment for the long term.
Thank you. Table 2. How would you recommend managing Montana's water resources so that our growing communities have access to clean drinking water? Sue?
Which is the same question that was asked a minute ago. I guess it was just longer, right? You know, I mean, again, I guess just as Diane was saying, I've certainly heard of conflicts in Bozeman and the Bitterroot, and in fact, Bill and I, when we built our house, bought the water rights that come in the ditch to our house, and someone told him recently that we could sell that for a substantial amount of money. So water is becoming a huge issue, and certainly we don't want housing built and then for people to find out they don't have adequate water. So I have to say, I think it's an issue that we need to continue to think about, and I don't know the current laws and regulations around it and exactly how they're working, but water has to be part of the plan for any new development, commercial or residential, in my mind.
Will?
Well, water will continue to be a problem, and it was when the people first came here, and it'll be here when we're all long gone. We need to make sure that we do have a continual supply of clean water. There are different ways to do it with larger developments. You put in a community water system that can run $10,000 a lot probably, plus all of the other associated fees that follow that sort of development. I'm in favor of community water systems for that particular issue. However, when you get the ones and twosy lot splits, a community water system probably doesn't make a great deal of sense. There's two things that we need to do. Number one, we need to be assured that Montana controls the water that it has and that starts here. There's pushes by states on down the stream that want to control our water. There's pushes even from the governor's office that wants to turn over some of our regulatory issues to the federal government. Montana should control their own waters. The other thing is the DNRC should make it easier for people to go through the permitting process to get their water. But first and foremost, we need to assure that our water in the state is clean. And, you know, I don't know what the legislature can do about that. This is a health department type issue, but those sorts of issues are going to continue to concern us and make sure that we have the lifestyle that we all like and why we live here.
Thank you, Will. Table 3 and half of table 4. How do you see the role of housing function as it pertains to Montana's economy in the future? And what policies would you support or propose to support that? Steve, we'd start with you.
Well, when we talk about housing in the future, within Montana, we really have kind of a split. Eastern Montana, except for around Sydney and the oil areas, is depopulated. Western Montana is becoming very attractive, great place to live. We're having an increase in the economy, which is driving up more businesses want to come here, which creates more jobs. As far as regulation or increasing the amount of housing available, I'm sorry, could you just give me?
Sure. How do you see the role of housing function as it pertains to Montana economy in the future? And what policies would you support or propose to support that?
Okay. Montana housing is going to have to develop, at least in the western part of the state, at a faster rate. We need more housing because we have more people trying to come in here. That's the reason why the housing values were going up all those years. And when you have more people trying to come in, then there are houses available, the housing prices are going to go up. Whereas in eastern Montana, of course, housing prices are going down. How can we help support that sort of development? We need to be able to remove the restrictions that are in place, allowing people to develop their housing, make it more housing available, more housing, affordable housing available. We need to try and do everything we can to encourage the creation of that sort of a development system. And again, we can do it responsibly without just going willy-nilly, but let's first off give the presumption that the people that are doing it correctly.
Teresa.
Thank you. I see this housing and the effect on the Montana economy as a way to marry a couple of my primary passions. I work and am most involved with health and human services. I see one of the ways that we could support housing as an industry and address increasing the number of healthcare professionals and providers in the underserved areas, including eastern Montana's or some of the underserved areas, specifically in western Montana. If we had some programs related to homeowner loans or trust funds that you can borrow against, or school repayment loans, because many people that I see in the nursing programs that I teach in are going into nursing because it is a way to live in Montana, have a decent job, make a life, and have a life. And one of the reasons that people leave then once they graduate is because headhunters literally come in here and seek out our well-prepared graduates in nursing, teaching, all sorts of things, to have them move to another state. One of the incentives that we could offer is that if you stay in Montana, then we would provide governmental support through some kind of trust fund that we've talked about to either repay school loans or help with ownership, because then people will stay.
Thank you, Teresa. Diane?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I think it is one of those not one size fits all. I grew up in eastern Montana and my family were teachers, and in fact, in a couple of towns we lived in a teacherage provided by the school because there really was no local housing. And that continues to be a problem, and I know because when I worked at the Office of Public Instruction in the last session, there was a bill that even related to how do you provide access to housing in rural areas for teachers who are being paid often very little money, not even equivalent to Missoula's. But it's not just in there. I know in places even in Missoula, I was talking to school administrators who are talking about how to find housing for teachers who want to come to Missoula but can't afford to live here. So that's a problem perhaps we think of more in rural areas, but it's not solely in rural areas. I'd also say it's the issue of our growing senior population and the disabled. New housing has to be not only affordable, energy efficient, it also has to be appropriate for different populations. So one size does not fit all there. And we have an extreme shortage of appropriate housing, I think, both for people with disabilities as well as for seniors who want to live in a more urbanized environment. I did carry one of the Housing Trust Fund bills back in '97, didn't pass then, and I will continue to work on these issues because I think they're critically important to the economy.
Thank you. Table 1, back to you. Would you recommend managing Montana's water resources so that our growing communities have access to clean drinking water?
This is a huge issue, and I sat on the Natural Resources Committee where it came up, and actually it's being studied over the interim, so I think we're going to be much more educated by the time we go back next session on the impacts of housing development on our water usage. But there are some really simple ways for us to impact it by encouraging developments to conserve water, and just educating people on how to do these water conservation methods will pay off for us in the long run, because we are going to continue to grow. So we need to really think long-term for our children. So simple things would be looking at gray water usage. We did pass a bill, Michelle Reinhardt passed it last session, for encouraging individual homes to be able to use gray water. Now the local governments have to figure out how to actually allow that permitting to happen, but we need to really think creatively around conserving our water. So the gray water usage, water conservation methods are really easy. Xeriscaping, I'm seeing it all over at businesses that are now recognizing that the costs of landscaping are on their bottom line. So being able to encourage how to reduce your costs for water and your landscaping. And lastly, I would have to say is if we want to talk about building our economy, let's talk about building infrastructure. We need to have clean water, which means we need to have an infrastructure that supports sewage in our growing communities. If you look at Sealy, they need money. We need to ask our federal government and our state government to encourage the construction of better infrastructure for our growing communities, and it will provide really good wage jobs for our folks that live here in Missoula County.
Thank you. Michelle?
This is both a water quality issue, but it's also a water quantity issue. And I think you were sort of getting at the exemption for individual wells, 35 gallons per minute or less. And when we have that model, we can really encourage sprawl and not necessarily direct growth to existing cities and towns, where it's easiest to extend new services, including water lines and sewer lines, and to make that the public investment in that infrastructure. So that's something that we can look at how we do that. The water and sanitation review is something that happens after your preliminary approval and prior to final plat, and that can be very frustrating for citizens who want to know, is there enough water, or what will the effects of the new development be on our water? And so people comment on that, but maybe there's a better way to bridge that gap and get more information about how and where we're growing. So as Teresa said, that your individual wells aren't too close to your septic tanks or getting additional nitrates. That's something that you saw in the Y area, and so that's why the wastewater system has been expanded to that area. But I do think it is something we need to better coordinate. And we could do planning for water and an inventory of our water resources like we are doing for land. Michelle Mudd at the Land Use Clinic has been looking at water planning for the region, and I think we could wisely invest dollars in that effort to figure out where we have water. In addition to needing it for homes, you need it for firefighting protection, and that's going to be one of the limitations on new homes. And so it's something we need to think about as well.
Thank you. Table 2, how do you see the role of housing function as it pertains to Montana economy in the future? And what policies would you support or propose to support that?
I think housing will continue to be a huge portion of our economy. I think a house is the most important investment any of us ever make. And I bought my first house on a low-interest loan that the state of Montana gave to first-time home buyers. I think that first home is your basis for everything else you do. If you can buy that first home and see it increase in value by the work you put into it, or by just maintaining it properly, you can go on to invest in other property. So I'd like to see that continue, that Montana have low-interest loans for first-time home buyers, that we have low-interest loans for veterans and low-income folks, so that that initial investment can be made. The other thing I think we have to think about is providing programs so people, tax incentives perhaps, so people can invest in energy efficiency in their homes. Because it is a scary fact that we're going to be facing about 50% increase in our heating costs next winter. And we need to make sure people can stay in their homes and that those homes will gain in value rather than having people having to leave them.
Will?
Okay, I'll just reiterate the same that most other people have talked about concerning housing. It'll continue to be strong as long as we do several things, particularly in the Missoula area. As long as we have clean water, as long as we have good government policies that are in force, as long as developers and home buyers know exactly what's expected of them when they go in before these governmental agencies, that in fact will keep housing at a level that's at least affordable. And as long as wages keep up with the cost of housing. It's no secret what's happened in Missoula and some of the other areas that housing is going through the roof. That's good for those that own the houses. It's not good for those that want to buy the homes. We need to streamline the way the government processes the permitting for these people that are either building homes or buying homes. And as long as we encourage crowding inside the city, there's going to be a certain segment of people that want to move outside of the city. So you have to deal with that. You can't force somebody to live where they don't want to live. In policies, we need to enforce and enforce our clean water laws. And we need to have, as I said before, good land utilization and good government processes.
Table 3 and a half. What do you consider to be the pros and cons of impact fees? And how would you feel about making them easier for local governments to impose? Steve?
I'm opposed to impact fees. First off, they're basically prepaid property taxes. And the thing is we pass them on to the developer, who then passes them on to the buyer. So it's the ultimate end user, the end payer is going to be the buyer of the property. Until that house is sold, until it's occupied, it's not really creating that much demand for services. What we need to do instead is like we've always done, is you build the house, people start moving into it, their families need to go to schools, they need to use roads. Those are the things that are always going to be developed because the property taxes that the owner is paying are going to go into being able to fund those projects. I mean, you look at the lifespan of a house, at least 80 years. If you could amortize all those costs over 80 years, it's really not that much. But instead what we're doing is we're trying to preload it up front without even giving the homeowner the tax deduction that would otherwise come from the fee of that sort. And what we should be doing instead is let's make housing affordable and available. And by doing that, then the property taxes are going to start rolling in, which will fund the necessary infrastructure improvements without having to keep housing out of reach of people who are just struggling to try and get into a house. The more people we have into houses, the more opportunity we have for property taxes. The more property taxes we have, the more opportunity for more infrastructure development.
Thanks, Steve. Teresa?
Thank you. I would see that differently. I would juxtapose that process. The pros I see related to impact fees is that some of that those fees would then be used as investments in that development. I understand the idea of using property taxes afterwards, but my sense is that if you have some you know that there's going to be some expectation. If there are going to be people that live there, and the plan is that it is a platted out or planned community that is going to be several houses, you know that there are going to be some services that are going to be basically required. Sewer is going to be one of them, depending on concentration of people, et cetera. So I could see that the impact fees early on being assessed based on real evidence. It's like this, we know these things, this is what this is based on. Because I see it as an investment from early on. We've invested in this community, and ultimately then the community is sold, the houses are sold, people move in, property taxes will continue, but they will not have to continue to go up as we try to backfill and fill up and address the unmet needs.
Diane?
Thank you. I am not absolutely opposed to impact fees, and I think the consensus of the state is that they're not, by definition, a problem. I think the problems are they for reasonable, provable expenses? Are they predictable? Do you know what you're getting into when you start? You know what the price of the house is, what's going to be involved in all of that? So that they have to be both reasonable and predictable. and part of a plan policy for how we're going to pay for those basic infrastructure costs that need to be in our communities. I worked some last session during the legislature, since I served on local government, at the request of the city of Missoula to help deal with one of the SID problems, which I think is just the flip of it. If you live in housing that doesn't adequately provide the infrastructure, and you think you can afford that house, but it turns out later you need to come up with additional money for SIDs because you don't have gutters, streets, alleyways, curbs, whatever, you're still going to pay them. I think better to have those payments be upfront and acknowledged in the impact fee structure rather than after the fact. So I carried the bill that passed to extend the length of time it took to pay those back from 12 to 20 years. Enormous stress, I know, on people who are particularly fixed income in a lot of our communities and in Missoula who need things like sidewalks, gutters, alleys, etc., but are finding those costs pretty difficult to pay. If those had been in a more upfront situation, they wouldn't be caught in that situation.
Well, that concludes our questions for this panel. We want to thank you all for joining us. Now we'd like to give you each a minute and a half to kind of surmise your candidacy. And we started with Betsy, so let's start now with Diane.
Well, thanks. I'm always glad to come here. I really appreciated last session having the support of the Realtors. I intend again to serve on local government. I see this as a partnership. This is not an area where my highest priority is. I work a lot in healthcare issues, so there are areas of development and housing that I care deeply about, but I really appreciate your input into these decisions that will come before us as local government. I am primarily interested in seeing that we find ways to make it more affordable for everyone in the state. I know when we sold my mother's house in Circle for $7,000 recently, that really was an interesting reflection compared to where I live up in Linda Vista. Housing is not an equal issue throughout the state, and we need to really accommodate the fact that we're going to have a major education initiative relative to aging of our population and people who move in here from the outside, who frequently will want to live more in an urban area, not drive as much with the gas prices, have access to resources, and other people who want to live out in our beautiful natural environment and deal with the issues we have around fire, etc. So we have more than a simple problem here. We have a very difficult, complicated problem, and I'm happy to work on it, and I would love to hear more from all of you on how you see those issues play out. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Teresa.
Thanks. My phrase that I use to describe my candidacy and my work is that I believe in healthy communities and that they support healthy people and subsequently healthy people support healthy communities. My background my master's degree is in occupational and environmental health nursing, so I went to places that were job sites. I was the Clorox nurse. I was the San Francisco Zoo nurse. I was the mainframe computer company's nurse that managed healthcare resources as well as insurance, etc. So I see it as figuring out ways that if I want to decrease healthcare costs, then when people say that there are impacts that we can have a healthier life, if everybody walks more, if people are safe, if senior citizens have access to both an outside and or safety issues, healthcare access to resources, all of those kinds of things. That's all part of the community. That's where I see our interaction, is to say, okay, if I have in-laws that are now in a one-story facility to live in because they can't live in a two-story house anymore, how do we take all of those things into consideration when we talk about development and developing the kind of communities that we want to live in and have people visit and continue in and protect some of the things that are so important to all of us.
Stephen.
I really like Missoula. I grew up in Hamilton, and we used to always come to visit. And, I remember when the Heidel House was the south end of town, and it's changed quite a bit. We know that. But one of the things, in addition to having a law degree, I also got a master's of public administration, which is really how to be a better bureaucrat. And it seems like whenever we have a problem, we always resort to the standard two methods of solving a problem. We'll impose more regulations and we're going to impose more fees. Why can't we assume that as adults we know what's best for us? We know, as long as we're fully informed, we know what all the options are, whatever they are, that we can make the choices for ourselves instead of having to have the government decide to make them for us because we're not smart enough to do it. We're smart enough to vote, we're smart enough to make the choices. This is what I talk about when I talk about a philosophy issue. It's a philosophy of who do you want to run your life? You or someone else that says they're from the government? It's a basic issue. You decide, and however it is, it'll work out, I'm sure. But for those of us who believe that we know what's best, as long as we're fully informed, then the right choice has got to be, we've got to control the government, we've got to rethink using regulation. We need to have more imagination, more and different approaches than what we've always done in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Will?
Again, I said I was a lifelong resident of the district that I'm attempting to represent, and I serve on the school board there, but I have 4 issues that are awfully dear to me. One is health care. As a school board member, I was president of MUST, Montana Unified School Trust. It offers health insurance to teachers and school districts and their board people. I am also interested in school funding. I've been on a school board. I'm in my 12th year now out there at Hellgate Elementary. We deal with the same problems today that we were dealing with 36 months ago when we were told that the school funding issue was going to be taken care of. It hasn't been. I'm also interested in land use. I spent 4 years on the Missoula Planning Board and the Missoula Planning Policy Board in the middle 70s. And then I'm even closer to Veterans Affairs. I'm a former United States Marine. I served in Vietnam, and we have not been taking care of our veterans like we should have been up to this point in time, both on the federal and the state level. So those are the 4 issues that I'm going to push when I'm in the legislature, and I appreciate you folks, number 1, inviting us all here, and number 2, for sticking around to hear what we all had to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Sue?
As I said earlier, I think my two most important issues are small business development and education. And I'm going to say that because also, like Betsy, I would like to see us address alternative energy in the state. And one way we do that is small business, because small business provides 80% of the innovation in this country. And so I want to see us really put some support behind small businesses, particularly those interested in alternative energy. Education has to be part of who we are if we want to have a strong economy in Montana. And business people are coming to the university system wanting to strengthen the colleges of technology. And there's a question from the Missoulian that says, why are we going to support more building at the university? The College of Technology is bursting at the seams, and we have to provide a better facility for the people getting a 2-year education in this state as demand grows. I will say that my biggest job is going to be to listen to the people in my district. And the people in my district are feeling the impact of energy and having to drive to get groceries. I had an elderly woman, 86 years old, whose husband died 20 years ago, and lives in a very nice house, in a very nice development out Mullen Road area, say, I am really scared. I can't afford to get in my car and drive all the way to the grocery store. My property taxes are increasing, my groceries are increasing, and when we talk about development, I'd like to hear us talk about having local stores so people stay closer to home.
Thank you, Sue. Michelle?
I worked very hard in my first session. I'm currently the youngest woman in the Montana House of Representatives, and I passed 7 pieces of legislation. There was only one newly elected member who passed more pieces of legislation. And a third of our folks are new, and so we've lost some of the institutional memory, and so now the executives and the lobbyists have more of that. And so this really is public service, where we take a lot of our times, in addition to our day jobs, and give up our evenings and weekends to be accessible to you and to problem solve. I think it's really easy for folks to get entrenched in positions or in viewpoints, but our challenge really is to come together to keep what we love about living here, because that's our common ground, and we really do have to think outside the box. And that's something that I want to do and continue to work with you. I took a 3-day mediation course. I think that will be very helpful for my day job and for the legislature, because we need to get beyond just fighting with each other and get the job done. And 90 days is very hard to do that, so we need to be having those conversations now and continue the dialogue. I don't have all the answers, but I am willing to bring people together. And I did it in Helena on annexation, on funeral insurance, on end-of-life issues. You name the issue, and common ground can be found if you're willing to work to look for it. I do have a background as a land use planner, so I understand many of the issues that we discussed today at a pretty complicated level. I do want to work on all the different pieces, and it's hard. We have a lot of ground to cover, but let's keep the dialogue going, and let's keep problem solving so we can get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Betsy?
Well, I guess as the final concluding person, I just want to say thank you for having us here, and it just kind of spurs the conversation at looking at all of the complex issues that we face as state legislators. It was a great honor to serve for my first session last session and learn about state government on many levels and be able to meet with people from all over the state. When you look at housing development, it does change from western to eastern, rural to urban. So one of the things that I agree with, what Michelle just said, is that we have lost a lot of institutional knowledge, and the reason that I want to run again is to take what I learned from the last session and really apply it to this next coming session, to try to integrate all the concerns that I've heard over the last 2 years and understand that it's a big job. And I'm excited about the possibilities that we have in this state, the opportunities to really capture a renewable energy and an energy economy that looks to the future and provides jobs for people in Montana that will give them a living wage so that they can afford housing. And I guess the one thing that I would say is, my district, which I didn't get to introduce at the beginning, spans from downtown to Arlee. So when you think about the complexity of our state, I have it within my own very district. I have the most downtown core, which is very dense and also has a diverse strata of income, to the Rattlesnake Wilderness, to a small section of Arlee. And so I think that's the most interesting thing about being in the legislature, is that you have to combine all those perspectives and hear what your constituents are saying about their needs. Thank you very much.
Well, again, we want to thank you all from the Missoula Organization of Realtors for your participation in this panel. And we look forward to finding out more about all of you as this campaign goes forward. So again, thank you very much for taking time to be with us.